Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda. Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. And recognizing our mother one day kind of points out a pattern. We celebrate Shakyamuni Buddha's birthday on one day, last month. And this month we're celebrating Shinran Shonin's birthday. But we take one day to celebrate these individuals who have a great effect on our lives. Don't you think we might celebrate it every day, since we have been benefited by their actions every day? So this Mother's Day is a day that we reflect on our mothers. And actually, it's that we reflect on a mother who might be ideal. Now, of course, not all mothers are the same. Some of us have been fortunate enough to have mothers who really loved us, but others may have had a different experience, such as the Buddha. He lost his mother after a week. Shinran lost his mother, or was separated, before the age of 9. And Rennyo, his 8th descendant, was separated from his mother sometime around the age of 8. And most of us have been fortunate enough to grow up with a mother. But the loss of a mother at these early ages must have had some effect on these leaders, because in their search for truth, I think this was significant in the fact that they had lost a mother early on. Now, the Buddha was raised by his aunt, Mahapajapati. And I want to take a little side trip and explain a few things. She was Queen Maya's older sister. And after the Buddha was enlightened, she petitioned the Buddha to accept women as nuns in the Sangha. And she had to request it several times, and he refused. Those times were actually somewhat similar to ours, in that women were in a lower position than men. But then she talked to Ananda, the Buddha's great disciple, and he's the one that really remembered all the words of the Buddha and spoke them to the others. And so it was Ananda who kind of talked to the Buddha and convinced him to accept women as part of the Sangha. And so you see, it is beneficial to have someone within the majority group to champion the cause of those in the minority group. And we see that even today. In the civil rights movement, we had the white students, and we have people like Rick Stamble, who was one of the freedom fighters. And then the Black Lives Movement, we have people of all ethnicities all over the world standing up for the Black Lives Matter movement. And now in the anti-Asian sentiment that's around, we have many people supporting our cause. And I wish I had said this last week, but there was a beautiful ceremony that was held Tuesday called May We Gather. And this was organized by several people. Reverend Dr. Duncan Williams was one of those. And this was a 49-day memorial service for the 6 Asian women who were killed in Atlanta. And participating in this were our own Bishop, Marvin Harada, and Rinbambyo Briones. It was held at the Higashi Honganji in Los Angeles, and it involved many Buddhists from many, many different Buddhist traditions. And there were, I'm sure, about 30 or so monks, nuns, teachers, masters, roshis. Many people participated. And there were many people who shared, and we had some wonderful speakers. And they were talking about the need to stand up and really voice our concerns for this anti-Asian sentiment and activities and the violence that we had been experiencing. And I think it is significant that we have people voicing our concerns, because what we're talking about is equality. And Buddhism, the Buddha Dharma, has always been about equality. The Buddha spoke against the caste system of India. And this vow of the Bodhisattva, which says that we are not liberated until all beings are liberated. And that means that it's not the individual self, but it's all of us together, this wholeness. When we say no self, what we mean is that we're not separate from each other. We, whether we think about it or not, are part of a larger group. We're part of a family, a community, a sangha, part of a city, a country, and even the world. And we're even part of the ecological world. This is the thought of oneness, interdependence. We are really involved with everything. And so what affects each one of us affects all of us. So equality is an important factor in Buddhism, this thought of interdependence. Now, getting back to our mothers, 2,500 years ago, this was a factor where the Buddha really worked for the equality of all beings, with women being equal to men. And it seems that it was men who had the power and decided, who was important. And so that work still goes on today. And it's up to us to really carry on that work. Now, how does this process work? Well, I think part of it is due to how we grow up. We grow up getting a sense of ourselves. And as we do that, we tend to think of ourselves as separate. But as we mature and go into wisdom, we realize that we are interconnected. And so it is this process of waking up to first thinking that we're separate, and then as we mature, realize that we are interconnected and part of everything else. And this is the truth of wholeness. And this is what we're trying to realize. Now, as a child, we all want to be loved. We want to be accepted. And we realize that when we are accepted, we can be who we are. We just want to be accepted just as we are. So on Mother's Day, we reflect on our mothers, and whether they were ideal or not, we think of them as ideal. Now, going back to what I said about the three major people in our lives, our mother, we talked about Shakyamuni Buddha, and Shinran and Rennyo growing up. Now, the Buddha on his own realized some truths, but what he realized was that, of course, he would not be around forever. He was a human and knew he would die. So knowing the importance of being loved just as we are, we have a reflection of his being. And he gave us the thought of Amida Buddha. Amida Buddha, wisdom and compassion. This human statue, when we see the statue, has an open robe with his heart exposed. And that he is leaning forward, always coming forward to accept us just as we are. And when we hear those terms. And I want to emphasize how important those terms are, because this is what we want as humans, just to be accepted, just to be part of the whole. And realizing this, the Buddha gave us Amida Buddha, that we have, and we can reflect on it and just be conscious by saying the term Namo Amida Butsu or Namandab. And because of that, both Shinran and Rennyo, who was raised in a monastery, lived and grew up in this condition of wisdom and compassion. And this was an experience of being accepted just as they are. Now, Amida Buddha is often referred to in Japanese as Oya-sama, which means honorable parent. So again, the Buddhists realized that this Amida, the character of Amida, could be thought of just like we have the thought of a mother, a loving parent who accepts us. And so when we say Namo Amida Butsu or Namandab, it is, as I had been saying, an expression of gratitude. But another experience of Namandab is that I am accepted just as I am. And we talk about being seeking refuge, Namo being, I seek refuge in the Buddha. And so in Mother's Day, we reflect on being accepted by our mother just as we are, accepted by the Buddha. And then what we talked about last week was kata, the spiritual kata, doing things over and over again, just so it becomes natural. And although we've been talking about gratitude and saying thank you, Namandavs, another thing we might do is say Namandavs and think about this realization of being accepted, shifting from an immature thought of being separate to the mature thought of being whole and being accepted. So we have the three poisons, which I like to point out as HIG, hatred, ignorance, and greed. Not quite sure what HIG is, but we can change that to humility, understanding, and gratitude, HUG, a hug. So if we find ourselves in a situation where there's a hateful emotion, just by saying Namandavs, Namandavs, hopefully we can change that thought of being separate, not liking someone else, or perhaps someone else not liking us, to humility, feeling that we are equal and one with others. And the second thing, ignorance. We see ignorance in many areas. And by saying Namandavs, perhaps we can change ignorance to understanding. Understanding that there are things we don't really know, and yet by being inclusive, we can understand that others have different feelings than we do. And then greed. Of course, we have desires for many, many things. But when we realize that there are many things that we have already received, that can change into gratitude. So hatred, ignorance, and greed can change to humility, understanding, and gratitude, HUG, hug. And just by saying Namandavs, we have a spiritual hug that although we may not have a mother who is present, we have this thought of being the experience of wisdom and compassion, the spiritual hug from Amida Buddha, that there is this essence of love. And we have experienced that just in life itself. Now, when we have this sense of being accepted, we can now spread that and practice one of our paramitas, perhaps the first one, dana, which is giving. And after saying, thank you, Namandavs, we might pass that on to someone else. Because as our Sang Ondok-san says, you know, we want to repay our teachers and our mother by always being grateful. And repaying that could be a simple thing as a smile or some kind word. And so you see, this hug is something we can spread. It may not really resolve something, but it makes all situations better. We feel supported. We are in oneness with all others. So today we're celebrating Mother's Day, but then rather than just have one day, we like to think of appreciating Mother on all days. And in the same way, we have the kata, the spiritual kata of reciting the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And with that, we can remember to take things that hurt us, hatred, ignorance, and greed, HIG, and turn that to humility, understanding, and gratitude, and think of that as a spiritual hug. So every day, as we do our kata of Nembutsu, putting our hands together, bowing, and thinking of Amida Buddha, finding one thing that we can really appreciate, knowing that it's come from the efforts of others. We also realize that it's the efforts of others, or Amida Buddha, that gives us the spiritual hug, that anytime we feel these attacks of hatred, ignorance, and greed, we can change that and do that on a daily basis. One day is not enough to appreciate our mother, nor to appreciate the Dharma. So with that, please join me in expressing our deepest appreciation for the Nembutsu, which reminds us that we are accepted just as we are, and we are never separate. We are always part of the whole. So please join me in putting our hands together and express our deep appreciation for the Nembutsu Dharma. Gassho, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Amanda.